So class has started, and I'm going to go over with you the poem The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur. And the first question asks you to think about the title before reading the poem and predict what the poem may be about. So go ahead and pause the video, respond to it, and then when you're ready, you can continue to play it, and we'll go through what the text is about. So this poem by Tupac, has two different meanings. It has a literal meaning, and it has a figurative meaning. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the figurative meaning together. The literal meaning is about a rose growing through a crack in the concrete. So it's about a rose growing through the crack in concrete, which is honestly by itself a pretty silly poem. Tupac would not intentionally write a poem about a rose growing through a crack in the concrete. No, he wrote it to be figurative. And in this poem, I want you to really kind of focus on the symbols. And so we're going to take it chunk by chunk, line by line, and we're going to annotate for the figurative meaning. So if we look at the first chunk of reading, did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Okay, so again, this is more than just about a rose growing through a crack in concrete. So let's first look at what symbols there might be. First of all, the rose stands for something else. In this case, it's going to stand for either Tupac or anyone who has struggled. So if we look at this poem now from the rose being Tupac and his life, what might the concrete be? So the concrete is a symbol. And the concrete would be a symbol of his life. And if we compare concrete to his life, concrete is hard, it's rough, it's gray, it's dirty. And after watching the video on Tupac, we would say too that his life was hard, it was rough. It wasn't the life that many of you and I had led. So this is kind of like your life or your environment. And now I don't mean environment like the weather outside, like, oh, the environment is sunny today. No, the environment is kind of like the culture that we're brought up in, our house, our community, our school. And so that's what concrete would symbolize, either someone's life or their environment. But why did he say that the rose grew from a crack in the concrete? So the crack is a symbol too. And the crack is a symbol, if we look at the concrete and there's a crack in it, it's teeny tiny, but that rose saw it as a chance or an opportunity to grow. He took that tiny chance or that tiny opportunity and said, hey, maybe I'm going to try to grow in this crack around this rough, hard environment. And that's what Tupac did. So if we're going to paraphrase it over here, it would be, did you hear about that person, in this case Tupac, who would never amount to anything? But found an opportunity to be successful. Okay? And so that's our figurative meaning. Now let's look at the next group of words. Proving nature's law is wrong It learned to walk without having feet. And so nature's law is a symbol too. If we look at nature's law in the literal standpoint, a rose could never grow from a crack in concrete. There's not enough soil. There's not enough sunlight. There's not enough food. It doesn't give enough water. So the rose proved nature's law was wrong. But in Tupac's world, nature's law symbolizes society's expectation. And so if we look at Tupac's life based on that video, he was an African American male. He grew up in a rough neighborhood. His mama, did drugs. She was single parent. Society would have very little expectation for him. But he proved society wrong and learned to walk without having feet. This is also symbolic. Kind of, what do our feet and our legs, they do what for our body? They support us. So he's saying he proved society wrong and he learned to walk even though he had no support. It's kind of a lack of support. So that's symbolic of that. And so again, if we go over to this side, we're going to go ahead and paraphrase it. He proved society wrong and became successful without their support or without any support. He goes on to say next, funny it seemed by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Fresh air is going to be our last symbol. And he's saying, by keeping his dreams, that rose never gave up. Tupac never gave up on their dreams. It finally learned to breathe fresh air. Fresh air is symbolic for success. Because he never gave up on his dreams, he became a success. And then the final lines read, long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared. And so this kind of can be a couple different things. He will never stop believing or dreaming. That can be one. And another one is his legacy will live on. Despite no one ever caring, despite the lack of support. Almost like he doesn't need anyone else to make his dreams come true. Okay? So who knew that this little poem about a rose growing from a crack in concrete can be so profound? And a poem, too, that I think everyone can connect to. Anyone who's ever struggled or had people believe that they couldn't do something and they did in spite of that low expectation. So what I want you to do next is I want you to go ahead and highlight for symbolism, which we've already highlighted here, personification, and remember personification is giving non-human things human qualities. Alliteration, that's the repetition of consonant sounds like Sally sells seashells. And then slang or text language, that's going to be language that I wouldn't approve of in a formal writing. For question 1, you're going to look at the symbolism, and I want you to list each symbol and what it stands for, even though you annotated up here, but some of you may have just listened to this lecture, and I want to make sure that you know it. And then you're going to talk about why you think he used the symbols. On the back side, talk about why Tupac used slang or text language. Number 3, identify the speaker's tone. Do not use happy, sad, or depressed for 2 reasons. 1, it doesn't fit not any of the tone, and 2, you need to pick better vocabulary words. Answer why, based on the tone, how do you think he feels about himself? And then I'm going to help you through number 4. Number 4 asks you to list the topic and subject of the poem, and then now determine the theme. I'm going to help you out with 4A. If I were to file this poem in my file cabinet under its subject, like I wouldn't file it under Tupac, because that's not a subject, that's an author. What would I file it under? What is this poem really about? It might be about hope. I might file it under hope, success, optimism, determination. Now, I want you to come up with a theme on your own, but using these qualities. What is Tupac telling the reader? What message does he want the reader to get from reading his poem about hope, success, optimism, or determination? Make sure it needs to be universal. How can I apply this theme to other texts or movies? Okay, these will be due tomorrow in class.